Engineering diploma from the National Technical University of Athens, Greece, and a master's in.
So Aris and I are going to do a joint presentation. I'm going to set some of the context for the Water Resources chapter by describing the National Climate Assessment, and Aris is going to do the bulk of the meat of the presentation in terms of highlighting some of the key messages. So the outline is we're going to talk about really quickly some of the top-line messages coming out of the National Climate Assessment, which was released on May 6th, and then talk a bit about some of the process and structure of the assessment. Hit the key messages from the Water Resources chapter, and then hopefully have plenty of time for discussion. So again, the report was released on May 6th, and there's been a lot of press and both print and radio and media, and some of the key top-line messages you've likely heard in those in the coverage that you've seen or read or heard. And there's four key top-line messages. One is that climate change is moved into the present. It's not just a problem of some distant future, and it's not an issue that's distant in terms of space. Americans today are already feeling the effect of increases in different types of extreme weather events. Those impacts are evident across every region in the U.S. and across important sectors. And another kind of the final top-line message is that there are things we can do, there are opportunities that we can take to both reduce the magnitude of future climatic change as well as prepare for the impacts that we can't avoid. So hopefully you've seen a number of these messages in the media coverage in the past 2 weeks. The vision of the NCA is very much focused on trying to migrate the intent and focus of the assessment report from not being just a documentation of observed and projected impacts, and that is still very much a fundamental aspect of the National Climate Assessment, but also to try and make it decision relevant and begin to put in place an effort that can generate information that is useful for decision makers throughout all levels of government and throughout the private sector and civil society. And so it's trying to take this towards a product that's in support of decision making, and that vision aligns very much with very nicely with the third goal of the most recent U.S. GCRP strategic plan, which talks about sustained assessments and improving the ability to understand, anticipate, and respond to impacts and vulnerabilities due to global change. The structure of the NCA was fundamentally it was a product of the National Climate Assessment Development Advisory Committee, a federal advisory committee that was made up of 44 non-federal members from all walks of life, as well as many federal ex officio members. We had working groups, we had author teams. The author teams were responsible for the product that you see. This all fed into a governance structure that was housed within the Global Change Research Program, and we had many inroads into that process, one of them which was the NCA Net, which is a creature that was created through this process, a way for many NGOs and associations to come together and provide input into the process. And there was a well-established and stood-up process at the federal level within the agencies through this interagency NCA working group that also contributed to the process. So a well-structured effort that led to and oversaw this process, which was really an exhaustive and comprehensive process for generating this report. It did a wonderful job, a masterful job of soliciting input. There was a request for information that went out, and we received well over 500 technical inputs that were parsed out to the different author teams that were foundational information for the author teams to consider. those author teams did a really good job of digesting that material and other sources to generate the initial draft, which was released in January of 2013. The initial draft went through extensive and detailed review and we got comments from the public, from agencies, from the National Academy of Sciences. It was just a very thorough process. Every comment was documented how it was responded to. There was actually a team of review editors that also documented how the different authors responded to the comments they received. So a very thorough process, and that led to the release on May 6th. Also a lot of public workshops as another mechanism to solicit input. So a very thorough and well-reviewed effort that led to the final document. The NCA is a statutorily required report that's supposed to be issued, supposed to be a quadrennial report. So, and it requires certain sectors to be addressed when considering the impacts of climate change in the U.S. These are some of the sectors that are included in the 30-plus chapters of the report. Of course, we'll talk about water resources later. I won't list all of those, but these are somewhat obvious ones that clearly are going to be experiencing and are experiencing some of the impacts of climate change. This NCA also did, for the first time, advance the notion of the kind of cross-cutting aspects of climate change, that different sectors are really linked joined at the hip, and water, energy, and land is one of those. So there was a great advancement in terms of looking at the interdependencies that exist across multiple different sectors. And so, again, I won't go through the list, but these were really instrumental in advancing, I think, the knowledge from a cross-disciplinary perspective. I'll note the oceans and coasts I don't think they were technically considered crosscuts, but those are also new features of this NCA. The product of the NCA is really much more than the final report. We have this full synthesis document that is available for download, and in fact, there may be one or two copies of it printed, but for the most part, this is a living document that exists on the website. But it also is it's been segmented really nicely so that you can grab individual reports, download them if you want. You can also dive in deeply into different aspects of the different chapters. It's a very interactive website. You can download the graphs that are populated throughout the report, find out the genesis, the originating material for the graphs that we've used. It provides those who want to do a very deep dive on this on a given topic. It provides the opportunity to do that. So it's a really rich website, and I encourage those who haven't gone there to check it out. And I think it can be very useful for research purposes going forward as well. What is new about this third NCA? Well, one is that it reflects an update from the most previous NCA in terms of assessing the potential impacts. This report assigned confidence levels to the findings and the key messages that Aris will talk about here shortly, as well as a clear line of sight between the conclusions that were drawn and the data that were utilized to draw those conclusions. And we use this term traceable accounts, which enables that line of sight, and those traceable accounts are also available online. Consistent with the vision, trying to move this towards a document and a process that can support decision-making throughout society. There was also a focus in two separate chapters on adaptation and mitigation as an attempt to try and, again, illustrate how the physical impacts are kind of cascading through society and what the implications are for management responses. Ultimately, we're trying to support in a sustained assessment process. The NACADAC did develop a special report on the sustained assessment process. How do we move towards a NCA-like effort that could be stood up on a regular basis and not be so spiky in terms of ramping up ahead of a 4-year report and then ramping back down. And as noted earlier, it's very much a web-based approach that is highly transparent. So I'm going to pivot here in a second. Just wanted to describe sort of the author team for the water resources effort. Aris and I were the convening lead authors, and I was blessed to be able to work with someone of Aris's caliber and disposition. We also had several folks from federal agencies: Mike Dettinger, Krista Peters-Letard, Kate White from the Corps of Engineers, a strong and good academic participation from the ACC was well represented. We had Georgia Tech and Duke on the team, and then we also had TC Richmond, who's one of the vice chairs for the NACADAC and is a water attorney here in Seattle who provided a really nice legal perspective on the issue. And then finally David Yates from UCAR, who is steeped in both the research around climate change and water, but also very active in the applied space. So it was an excellent team, and I think we provided a solid product. So Aris, I will hand it over to you.
Okay.
Hey Ari, this is Amrit. So I'm gonna go ahead and pass controls to you.
Okay.
You should get a pop-up asking to share your screen.
Is it showing?
Yes, it is now. We can see your desktop right now.
Okay.
So you need to pull up the presentation.
Right. So let's see. Sorry, that's not it. How's it looking now?
Yep, we can see it.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I would like to also thank Nancy and Noah for inviting us for this presentation, and I also would like to say that we were very fortunate, Paul and I, to have the opportunity to work with the lead author team, and so this presentation is on behalf of all of us. The chapter actually has benefited from many sources of technical input, and specifically I should mention the very comprehensive input from the federal agencies on water resources, really a comprehensive document which actually provided a lot of the material that you see in the chapter. Also, I'd like also to thank the NCA leadership, and specifically Kathy Jacobs, who was really the force behind this third NCA. So we thank you very much for your efforts. The chapter is organized in the themes that you see here. Mainly, we are talking about the water cycle changes, which is the supply side of things. Then we move into the water demand and use changes. We try to put it together and assess what are the key vulnerabilities in different U.S. regions. And finally, we make some recommendations that are policy relevant with respect to management, adaptation, institutional responses. On the water cycle changes, we address fluxes, precipitation, transpiration, runoff, stream flow, and groundwater recharge, but also storages that are in the system, and that includes snowpack, lakes, reservoirs, and wetlands, soil moisture, and groundwater. We also address, to the extent that the literature allowed us, water quality changes and issues such as water temperature, sediment, nutrients, and the like. So in this schematic here, you see that the evidence that the climate is warming is compelling. And you can see it from the various processes that have been measured for several decades in the ocean, in the land, and also in the atmosphere. And these changes that have been measured cannot actually be explained through natural causes. And our colleagues in the climate science chapter make a very strong case that unless we include the emissions, that is the human-caused emissions, in the models, we cannot actually explain, we cannot actually describe the warming that is taking place in recent decades. And that's what you see in this schematic on the right. where the blue corresponds to the predictions of these models, the global climate models, using only natural factors, volcanoes and the like, solar forcing that is and the like. And in fact, if you did that, you could see that there could be a slight decrease in temperature. And only if you include the human-caused emissions, the greenhouse gases, you can actually bracket the temperature increases that we observe. So from different lines of thinking and evidence, I think the report makes a very strong case that the changes that have been observed are actually due and are attributed to emissions. Here you see some of the observed and projected global temperatures, observations and also from models. And the projections are that by the end of the century, we may be looking to increases of 2.5 to about 8 degrees Fahrenheit, depending on the emission scenario that is used. And the report includes both results from the CMIP-3 modeling and assessments, as well as CMIP-4, which came a little bit late in the development of the report, but nevertheless, our climate colleagues were able to incorporate a lot of the results. This schematic shows the expected anticipated sea level rise, which is another very critical impact that impacts water resources. And again, towards the end of the century, we may be looking at an increase of 1 to 4 feet in sea level. As far as so these were the previous ones, changes were about the global changes. This schematic shows the temperature and precipitation changes that have been observed in the U.S. And on the left here, you see the temperature increases, and there have been increases just about in every U.S. region, with the last decade, 2001, 2012, being the warmer in every region in the U.S. And the schematic on the right shows the precipitation increases. Precipitation also consistently increases in all of the U.S. Of course, the regional variability is different, and so different regions exhibit different responses. The inserts over here indicate the recent decades, the changes that have been observed in recent decades, and especially for the precipitation, you can see that the consistency in the increase of temperature in the last several years. As far as projections go, the models are also very consistent in projecting that temperature will increase depending on the emissions from 3 to 10 degrees Fahrenheit by the end of the century. And these increases are actually higher than the model-to-model range. So the uncertainty, let's say, between the models is smaller than the actual increase that they project for the temperature. The situation for precipitation in the U.S. is a little less definitive, because the U.S. falls in the transition zone between the subtropics and which are going to be drier globally, and the wetter north. So a lot of the regions are in this area over here, and some of them are projected to experience increased precipitation, and some to experience decreased precipitation. The directions that are clear are about reductions in the southwest in the spring, and also increases in the northeast, midwest, and Alaska. So these regions are a bit outside this transition zone, and that's why the precipitation direction is clear in this case. Also, the models indicate that the dry spells are going to increase in most regions. And of course, that has implications for drought management and occurrence. In addition to the averages, the models also indicate that, in fact, this is observations. So the heavy precipitation changes that have been observed are shown here, and in every U.S. region there is a clear trend of increase, as you see. These are the heavy precipitation events, that is 1% of all daily events, and this trend is expected to increase further in all the U.S. regions. That, of course, has implications for the design of the infrastructure, among other things, because the frequencies of these events of high precipitation are going to change, for example, from 1 to 20 frequencies to more frequent, 1 to 15 years, 1 to 5 years. And of course, that has implications for the design of all sorts of water infrastructure. Again, these trends that we observe are actually outside the range of the natural variations, which provides confidence that the changes are real and they are not just random influences. With respect to some of the other components of the water cycle, for example, the snowpack or the snow water equivalent, runoff and soil moisture, there have been quite a few studies. This one in particular is about the western U.S. and shows the changes that are projected for 2041 to 2070 with respect to 1971 to 2000. And all of the changes you see here indicate reductions in the snow water equivalent, in runoff, and also in soil moisture, and significant, especially losses in snowpack. And in fact, this particular variable is one where the attribution study also shows that it is to a large extent due to the human-caused emissions. Similar trends you see all around the U.S., and this is a multi-satellite product of the surface soil moisture, recent product, and it shows that a lot of the U.S. regions are experiencing a drying trend. You can zoom into seasons for the soil moisture, which is a key component because it regulates runoff and evapotranspiration, and also is very important for agriculture. So you can zoom into the particular seasons and be able to understand what are the implications relative to runoff as well as groundwater recharge, especially during spring and early summer. But the changes are happening, and as you see in many regions, there is a spatial coherence in the patterns of drying or wetting. Evapotranspiration is not as clear in terms of the exhibiting trends or in the future projections, and that's because it depends on many factors, including temperature, of course, solar energy, winds, humidity, and soil moisture availability, and it depends on the region. It is at this point quite uncertain, and it is an area where research is needed and more measurements are needed to be able to quantify better the impacts of the coming changes. Generally, though, based on the understanding of the physical processes involved, we expect that the potentiality, the capacity of the atmosphere to abstract water from the surface, is going to increase with temperature. But the actuality, evapotranspiration, will depend on the conditions of the soil moisture in the particular region. The stream flow is shown here again for the western U.S. It's one of the studies that we have reviewed among many. What you see here is that the northern states and the northern regions, consistent with what I mentioned earlier with respect to the precipitation changes, the northern states and regions and basins exhibit an increase of runoff and stream flow. And while the southern basins generally experience declines. There is a difference between the cool season and the warm season runoff and stream flow because of the changes of the snowpack. So there's during the cool season, for example, in many of these regions, the indication is that the cool season runoff is going and stream flow is going to increase because of these impacts from the snowpack, and that the warm season during the warm season stream flow may decrease. All of these, of course, have very significant implications for water management, reservoir operations, and hydropower. And again, the significance of these changes is somewhat certain because of the fact that these changes exceed the ranges. A lot of these changes, anyway, exceed the ranges of the natural variability. Flooding is another one of these processes and of the water cycle that is not absolutely definitive, but it depends on the local circumstances. Generally, flooding depends on precipitation intensity, soil moisture, the time of the year that it happens, snow cover, land use, and terrain. So for large basins in particular, the trends are not absolutely clear. However, because of the increase in the heavy precipitation events that has been observed and predicted and projected, we expect that the floods and urban flooding, which applies to smaller basins, is going to increase. Coastal flooding also and the storm surge is going to become more significant because of the sea level rise in many coastal areas. Generally, the flooding issue is very important because it affects infrastructure from power plants to wastewater treatment plants to transportation systems, and again, it is an area that requires more study, especially regionally, to be able to ascertain what the local effects and projections will look like. This is a study by Peterson and all that shows some of the results around the country for many sites, and that is the magnitude, the trends actually of the flood magnitudes in recent decades, from 1920 to 2008. And although some of these results are not statistically significant, you can see that there is some coherence in the occurrence of the errors that go up, which is the increase in flood magnitude, and the occurrence of the errors that go down, and the magnitude of them. Generally, what the graph shows is that significant increases are expected for the Midwest and the Northeast, and decreases are expected in the Southwest. And again, both from the point of view of the soil moisture trends and also from the point of view of the precipitation changes, these are consistent findings. Groundwater availability is very important for many U.S. regions, and you see here on the right, in blue, the regions that almost 100% depend on groundwater resources. So the Mississippi Valley, the southeastern Florida, the Great Lakes region, Great Plains, and Texas coast are some of these areas that depend very significantly on groundwater resources. Groundwater is very important because it actually is a buffer against climatic extremes like droughts, and could be used to soften the impact of droughts. It is, on the other hand, susceptible to combined stresses, and it is a little difficult to separate out the effects of climatic change versus the effects of the increased demands. And so that's another area that requires additional work and study, and especially because groundwater is poorly monitored, and one of our recommendations is for the establishment of the National Groundwater Monitoring Framework, which does not exist at present. Yes, and in particular, some of the aquifers that are most vulnerable to climatic change because of the combination of the influences are aquifers that are close to the coast, and they're subjected to inland droughts, increased withdrawals, and of course the effects of the sea level rise. These are important aquifers because, as we know, a very significant percentage of the population lives around the coast, actually 50% or more. And so, again, we have to. One of the issues is to make sure that these aquifer systems are monitored well, and also they are managed in this integrated way that combines surface and groundwater resources. Water quality is changing, and and in a lot of cases, the measurements actually show that distinctly. For example, here you see the stratification season length in Lake Tahoe that increases, and the same thing Lake Superior, and overall the ice-covered area of Lake Superior decreases. But again, the question of the overall response to climatic change depends on many factors and many elements of the water cycle, and it's the local aspect that has to be studied in more detail. Generally, though, the water quality factors that are expected to be impacted by climatic changes, either because of the increased precipitation or because of the low flows or flooding, include water temperature, sediment generation and transport, nutrient concentrations, algal blooms and oxygen conditions, and contaminant loads. Overall, a conservative strategy is to make sure that there is reduction of sediment, nutrient, and contaminant loads at the source, and that remains the most effective management response for now. So this was a summary of what the expected changes in the water cycle processes look like. Of course, the climate impacts water usage as well, and we have a whole section discussing the potential changes that are expected to occur for the different water uses. This is a schematic that's based on USGS 2005 data and shows the water withdrawals in the U.S. These are the total withdrawals here, and you see the distribution. This one shows the distribution of the municipal and industrial, mostly withdrawals with respect to the total in percentage form, and you see that a lot of that, predominantly the eastern part of the U.S. This component that is of M&I represents a very significant portion of the total withdrawals in this part of the country. While in the western U.S., the most important component of the withdrawals has to do with irrigation, livestock, and aquaculture. So the blue colors are the ones that show the higher percentages. The thermoelectric withdrawals are shown here. They are spotty in the sense that they are concentrated in the areas that the plants exist. But as Paul said, that could be an area where this cross-cutting is important between water and energy, because if changes are happening in these parts where these thermoelectric plants are located and result in perhaps disrupting the operations, that will have a very significant impact on the energy system. The projections for the different water uses there are not so many studies actually, but this particular study by Brown et al. is quite comprehensive, and they looked at what will happen in 50 years from now, 2060, in various cases of with and without climatic change. And so, of course, the without climatic change we have to do with the changes that are envisioned and are anticipated because of population change, the socioeconomic changes that are going on, and they are also consistent with the creation of the emissions of the gas emissions. But you see here that some of the regions in the United States, even without climatic change, are expected to experience significant increases in water demand. The brown areas are areas where the change could be more than 50%, while others in the blue regions here are not expected to have so much of a significant change under no climatic change. If we superimpose the two factors, then you really see a picture that's darker, and most of the regions here in the United States are expected to experience a significant increase. So the combined stresses of climatic change and the increase of the demand is something that can present challenges to water resources and the management of these river basins and systems. And here, okay, I guess I will pivot now to Paul, but that's exactly what this schematic here shows. It's really about the challenges that the water resources managers will face, are expected to face, because of these combined changes of the water cycle as well as the water use. Amrit, I would like to switch to Paul because he would like to discuss this particular slide.
Okay, so Paul, I'm going to go ahead and pass controls to you.
Okay.
You should get a pop-up.
Hold on.
So we made you presenter. You just need to share your screen now.
Right. I got to get the... Hold on a second here. Thanks for that, Aris. And I wanted to say we're in the home stretch here, so we only have a couple more slides to get through. And let me open up the presentation. Okay, so
yeah, it's up and running now.
Okay, great. So this is the final section in the chapter, and Aris did a nice job of walking us through the structure, which was very much intentional to focus on the sort of physical impacts on the water cycle, how those impacts start to cascade through uses and demand, and ultimately we now find ourselves at the issue of, well, what are the management responses and institutional responses? And we had two key messages in this section. One is just that that climate change will introduce new risks for society and the water sector that may not be able to be managed with existing practices. And the implication there is that we're going to need to explore and learn new ways to manage the risks that will be, in some cases, introduced or exacerbated by climate change. And then the second key message is that there are things we can do to strengthen management in light of these new risks, and increasing resilience and enhancing adaptive capacity are some examples of the high-level type of opportunities that can be pursued. And that we go through and identify some of the adaptation strategies that are out there that can be pursued. So conservation programs, more flexible and risk-based operating rules for reservoirs, so a more dynamic management approach for the management of reservoirs. Aris alluded to the need for stronger integrated surface water, groundwater management, strengthening monitoring systems, and also this stronger coordination amongst stakeholders, and particularly amongst those sectors that may have competing demands for the water resource. So these two graphs just are attempt to show some of the analysis that's been done in different parts of the country. Of course, there's a lot of analysis and assessment work has been done, and that start to tee up some of the management implications. So on the left, we have a study from the Colorado that projects that demand is going to exceed supply on the system even more dramatically than what we see now by 2060. And on the right, in the southeast, and this is work that Aris led, looking at the lake levels in Lake Lanier, and in conjunction with declining soil moisture, and what those projected changes mean for water management, for agriculture, for environmental impacts in that system. And so again, starts to really call up the need to think through, what do these risks mean, and what are some strategies that can be deployed to best manage those risks. So that is the the general thrust of the chapter, and just to close, and then hopefully move on to some questions. I hope you feel that there's been a really extensive treatment of the water cycle and water resource impacts in this chapter. You know, there was strong effort to keep each chapter relatively short, so we tried to do as much as we could with the real estate that we had, and you know, I think there were some. It's I think a very strong treatment of those two topical areas, and that the traceable accounts again really provide a line of sight and a lineage in terms of how we came to the conclusions and findings that we did. The adaptation institutional responses is arguably is more of an emergent topic compared to the research that's been done on impacts on water cycle, but we try and document some of the institutional and legal issues that are before us, as well as highlighting some of the sectoral activities that are underway that are helping to build adaptive capacity that may be promising going forward. The whole chapter and the whole report is undergirded by a focus on observed and projected changes. So we try and do a nice job of delineating between those two, and where possible provide that regional and seasonal specificity of what the observed and projected changes are, because that clearly has implications for where you live and what time of year that change is projected to occur can have significant implications for water use and water demand. So that is the presentation, and Amrit, I guess I turn it over to you for questions for Aris and possibly myself.
Thank you very much. This was a great presentation, and I know a lot of people were waiting to hear this. We have the questions are coming in quickly, so we're going to just go straight to the questions. The first one is, it's a two-parter. Which modeling tools were used to derive temperature and precipitation predictions, and how were the modeling tools selected? Then they want to know, did the NCA suggest future modeling experiments oriented towards producing improved information for decision making? So you both have the ability to answer.
So so maybe I'll take a stab.
Sure.
So of course the measurements, a lot of in each one of these processes and discussions, there's an observed change that has been documented, and then there's a projected change. And so the idea, of course, is to try and see if these two are consistent, because we want to make sure that because it lends credibility, I guess, to the projections. But I suppose the question is really about how the projections in temperature and precipitation came about, and there are many they're all available models, basically. The GCMs that were used to make these projections. So there was an ensemble of GCM models. I think the climate colleagues pretty much used all of the available IPCC models, and of course there was downscaling after that of some of the fields to be able to lead us to the specific variables that we wanted to analyze. That was done at NOAA, but of course. You know, there have been all sorts of other published studies that were incorporated and reviewed. So there's not one specific model that was used. It was all the ensemble of models that's available, IPCC models, to make these predictions. And it was they were classified also, these projections. In fact, they were classified with respect to the emission scenarios. So different emission scenarios, just about all of the IPCC models, and downscaling. So it's a suite of models that was used.
Okay, thanks, guys. The next question coming in is, wouldn't the observed soil moisture changes in the U.S. from 1988 to 2012 be dominated by natural variability associated with the PDO and AMO?
It is a short period. This multi-satellite product, actually, it's that I think they're referring to this satellite product. So it's a short period to actually assess long-term trends. That's for sure. So it is possible that within that time period that the soil moisture trend is showing, it is impacted by long oceanic patterns. That's true. But at the same time, I think what we really need to consider is not just one particular process of the water cycle, but we need to look at the totality of what's happening and consider, for example, how the soil moisture gets changed relative to the precipitation changes and streamflow changes and the like. So if you look at this in a more holistic manner, then perhaps the picture emerges that yes, there are interannual variabilities and natural variations, but at the same time there is a trend that seems to be occurring.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, several slides report projections based on the A1B SRES scenario. Given the recent trends in actual emissions at the top of the scenarios, is it unrealistic and misleading to continue to use the A1B scenario?
Yes, we as I said, the assessment began 3 years ago, actually, and at that time the CMIP-5 results were not available. So a lot of the studies that were reviewed were relevant to the previous phase of the IPCC assessment, the CMIP-3, and that's where the A1B, the B1, and the B2 and the A2 scenarios were relevant. But then the CMIP-5 results and scenarios became available, and what happened was that we, especially the climate chapter, has done a very good job contrasting and comparing how the new results, in fact, differ or are similar to the A2 and the A1B. And in many cases, you see differences. Of course, the actual trends and the actual do not change very much, but the specific ranges might change. So it's not. We agree with the commenter that the appropriate thing to do is to actually be updating the assessments and the studies using the latest IPCC scenarios. But it's also a good idea to compare and contrast how the different experiments look like and what changes we observe, because we believe that this also strengthens the confidence in the science that underlines these models. And it does appear to be so. It's not that the CMIP-5 gives us totally different results from the CMIP-3. If this were the case, then I think the uncertainty would be more significant, and perhaps the confidence in the results would not be as high. But that's not the case, and therefore that's something to think about.
Okay, the next question coming in is, in the project data on precipitation in the U.S. showed in the webinar slides, was it based on CMIP-3 or CMIP-5?
Let's see.
I think it was 3.
Paul, you wanna say that?
I think it was 3. I don't know definitively if that is the case, but
so are you asking you're not asking about the observed, right? You're asking about the projected, right? So I think the climate chapter actually has both. It actually shows changes of temperature and precipitation with respect to the CMIP-3 as well as CMIP-5.
Right.
Yeah. So there's both in the chapter. We didn't include everything here because, of course, there's no time. But yes, and the changes, there are some changes and there are some differences, especially in the transition zones. But overall, there's significant consistency as well on the global scale.
Okay, this is an opinion question from you too. Climate change impacts on water resources vary spatially at different trends. Should a national policy be adapted to address such impacts, or left to the regional stakeholder individual state to face the challenges?
That is a well, one caveat should be clear that such a question was not the focus of the NCA. We were very clear in trying not to be policy prescriptive across the whole enterprise. So, so my response would be outside the context of the Water Resources chapter and the NACADAC. I mean, I think that, from my opinion, it seems like there is, at the least, there is certainly something. There are things that can be done at the national level to support the local efforts to understand that spatial variability and the implications that it has at the local level. And you know, I think any sort of national effort ultimately would need to recognize that. So I don't know if I have a strong opinion on that as much as, in effect, I think agreeing with the implicit issue in that question, which is that federal effort would, if there were to be a federal effort, would need to be very much cognizant of those that spatial variability.
In addition, I also like to add that, as Paul said, a lot of the products and information relate to measuring and monitoring systems that have to be at the national level because of the magnitude, the expense, you know, to deploy them and all. So there's a significant role that the federal government has to play. On the other hand, a lot of the water resources are local, impacts are local, and a lot of the water resources are owned by the states and they're managed by the states. One of the recommendations we make is that there has to be a stronger link and coordination between the federal, state, and local agencies. And so we don't believe that it is an either-or kind of thing, but it has to be a coordinated effort between the federal government and the states and the state governments and local governments to be able to work in sync and be able to utilize the best information possible, but at the same time maintain the management and the ownership of the resources and impacts that are local. So that's the general view, I think.
Okay, and then it looks like we have time for one last question here. So it is, what are projections for changes in stream flow for August to November?
In which region?
They didn't specify.
Right. So yes. So if as we indicated, it depends on the place. It depends on the latitude. For example, Midwest and Northeast are expected to have higher average runoff and stream flow, while the southern latitudes, Southwest especially, but also Southeast and the lower Great Plains are expected to have declines of runoff. And so it all depends. Now, a particular sub-basin, a particular region also is influenced by the infrastructure that's there, dams and demands and interactions with groundwater and other things. So it's a very complex question, and it has to be addressed at the local level with good knowledge of the physics of the local basins. But the general trends are as we talked about. That is, northern latitudes, more precipitation and most likely increases of runoff and stream flow. Lower latitudes, especially southwest and southeast, more droughts, lower flows, declines of runoff, and in between these latitudes, the increases and decreases depend on so many other factors.
And longer dry spells.
And longer dry spells, yeah, the droughts, yes.
So unfortunately, we've run out of time, and there's a few more questions left. So if you still have questions, please go ahead and contact Paul or Ari on your own. I'm sorry we had to cut you off here. But on behalf of all the organizations I mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, we thank you all for coming, and we especially want to thank Paul and Ari for their presentations. We'll be in touch with one last webinar for the season in a week or so, and we'll be sending it out through the listserv. If you don't get a message, please contact one of us.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you.
Chris.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye now. Thank you.